The story of water is really the story of pipes, their shape, their design, where they go and what they carry, their past and, even more importantly, their future, as ever more concrete, more people and extreme weather events test this vital infrastructure to its very limit.
To see what that means in practice, let's take a trip down those pipes. Six hours after someone flushes the loo in central London, it ends up here. Beckton, the biggest sewage plant in Europe, processing the waste of 4 million households in Britain's capital. And that includes rather a lot of nasty stuff which gets filtered and screened as it arrives down the pipes. Well, it's hard to describe how it smells. Very, very bad, like kind of the worst lavatory you've ever been to. And you can see actually in there's little bits of plastic. There are wet wipes and sanitary towels and all sorts of other things. A moment ago we saw a dead rat in here. But ultimately this is an important part of filtering off that water that we flush down the loo and put down the drains, so that you can actually do something useful with the rest of it. In some ways this plant is state of the art. They perform a kind of alchemy here, turning our waste into power and products. But in other senses, this is a part of history. Beckton was one of the earliest Victorian water plants, set up in the era of Sir Joseph Bazalgette, the man whose sewage system helped clean up London, saving it from cholera outbreaks. But Bazalgette, hero though he was, also took one fateful decision which still haunts us today. Rather than sending sewage and drain water down separate pipes, he chose to throw them all down the same pipe. This combined system is at the root of many of today's problems. This country's water crisis is actually a pipes crisis, because pretty much all of that stuff, whether it's sewage, grey water, rainwater, goes in the same drains and comes down the same pipes, with the upshot that when it rains, the system struggles to cope. We've all seen what happened next. Sewage overflows into river, into the sea, polluting swimming waters and wildlife. But here's the thing, this isn't a bug in the system, it is the system. It's the inexorable logic of a system where you carry rainwater and sewage in the same pipes. It's nearly impossible to prevent these overflows.
If you close off the storm overflows as we have today, they'll just back up into people's homes. And that's not what we want.
So what, one just needs to be kind of realistic about?
Well, I think it's about realistic about the timescale and what infrastructure needs to change over time, and it can't be changed in just a few years.
Except that these overflows were only supposed to be in exceptional circumstances. The real problem is they're happening regularly, in some cases daily, in some cases when there's no rain. And that, says everyone, is unacceptable.
Let's sort this out. It isn't a Victorian problem. It is true that there are some structures of sewers left, but much has been changed, replaced, upgraded, etc. since. So just blaming it on the Victorians is just lazy. It's easy and it's convenient.
Back at the plant in Beckton, our sewage has now been screened and filtered, and the good stuff, if you can call it that, is being treated with, well, bubbles.
So our activated sludge plant is designed to take that sewage, which still contains pollutant materials, and use a process where it is aerated and it's mixed with beautiful bacteria who do a job of work to remove those pollutants from the water so that it can then flow out into the final settlement area.
So it's kind of like a yogurt or a sourdough. Yeah, the funny thing is, I mean, this is basically poo and wee here.
Well, no, the poo's been removed. The large matter has been removed in the sludge process.
Okay.
But this is predominantly, the storm water and and any liquids that are part of that sewage discharge.
But if there are, so all of these kind of sewage outflows people have heard about, sometimes seen, Do they come from a place like this, or like what kind of circumstances are they generally kind of happening under?
They do come from sewage treatment works, and it depends on the works, and it depends on the nature of the assets. And you know, we are aware that across the industry we have had polluting discharges which are unacceptable.
Those discharges are unacceptable for another reason. The sewage could be turned into something quite valuable, something which can actually feed us.
After everything else has been removed, the water, the contaminants, the methane which powers the plant, you get left with this stuff. They call it cake, and it is a very nitrogen-rich mixture which they sell on to be used as fertiliser, really high-grade fertiliser. So what began coming out of your bottom will go on to fertilise what you're going to eat next.
It is, if you can stomach it, the ultimate example of what economists call the circular economy. But here's the thing, up until the 90s, the solid waste from here was simply tipped into the North Sea. Today's more sophisticated processing was actually forced on Britain by European directives. But it was expensive, which brings us to the other P word, privatisation.
We needed a massive investment in water from 1990 onwards. The government wasn't going to pay for it, and therefore the private sector should borrow the money to invest to renew the infrastructure for water.
Except it didn't go entirely to plan.
What effectively the new owners of the companies did was to say, look, we can mortgage these assets. We can go to the bank and say, how much will you lend us against these assets? But then they distributed that money in the form of dividends to shareholders. So here we are, 30-something years later, no new reservoirs have been built, no new resources are in place, and frankly, the state of the sewers is not fit for purpose.
Are you proud of the water system in this country?
I know that we have the best drinking water in the world. I know that we have seen the cleanliness of our beaches and our bathing waters increase significantly since 2010. Of course, I think of the work that we have done unveiling aspects of frankly, the scale of the sewage scandal has only...
It is a scandal, is it?
Well, it's under criminal investigation.
But on top of those criminal investigations, other authorities, such as the Office for Environmental Protection, are also investigating the regulators over sewage outflows, including DEFRA themselves. "18 hours after that lavatory was flushed, the work in Beckton is now effectively over. The drain water and sewage filtered, processed and sent back to where it started.
If you flush the loo in central London, then this is where it ends up, having been scrubbed of all or most of the nasty stuff, and now ready to go back into the river.
Nearly as clean as the river water. That's the theory at least, but all too often the system doesn't work like this. Those Victorian pipes designed to take both rainwater and sewage get overwhelmed. One idea would be to start afresh, but London is taking another route, supplementing those old pipes with one very big pipe, the Tideway Tunnel.
Bazalgette's, the old sewers, were designed for 2 million people. As we know, London is well over 8 now and still growing. So these tunnels have been designed for at least a 120-year design life. So the sheer size of them should cope with that future population growth.
And so as of next year, this will potentially, when it's raining a lot, when there's a lot going on, this will potentially be full of water where we're standing right now.
Yes, it will. So this tunnel itself and also the shaft behind at times could be completely full of water and sewage.
Tideway, by the way, isn't just a pipe. This tunnel is almost better thought of as a gigantic tank, storing sewage and rainwater to be processed gradually rather than engulfing London. But ambitious as the project is, not to mention expensive at £4.5 billion, it's hard not to feel a little disappointed by it too. London will still see sewage overflows, just less often, because that combined system of pipes stays in place. Which raises a question. Isn't there some better, more sensible way of doing things?
Copenhagen. The harbour here in the Danish capital used to be so dirty no one dreamt of swimming in it. Sewage, industrial waste. Now, it's a different story. The harbour's been cleaned up, sewage discharges cut, but it didn't stop there. They've begun to rethink things altogether. Unlike in central London or most British cities, where everything goes down in one big pipe, they're innovating here. In this new section of the city, there's not one pipe, but three. One for sewage, one for rainwater from roofs, feeding the canals here, and one for rainwater from the roads. It gets filtered here. The dirty rainwater running through these pipes, a kind of micro version of what we saw in Beckton, is purified in these filters.
So the water comes in over there, does it?
We have the center well, that's where the water's coming, then it's been split up in 4 sections.
Right.
The 4 sections, we are standing on one of them here, and then it's been cleaned.
So what comes into this is quite dirty road water,
Yeah.
and what goes out is
Clean water.
clean water, and that's going into that nature reserve
Yes, it is.
over there.
The upshot is the system doesn't get engulfed as often. Of course, in the old part of Copenhagen, they're also doing something similar to what's happening in London, with a series of big overflow tunnels.
Oh, it's eerie in here.
It is.
These pipes are in part a response to what happened in 2011, when torrential rain flooded much of the city.
Is this a totally new kind of thing for Copenhagen?
Well, no, we have done a lot of tunnels before. This is going to be one of the biggest pump station we have. The capacity of it is 20 cubic meters per second.
Right.
So that's quite a lot.
Water companies from around the world come here to see how the Danes are doing it, going far beyond our domestic firms to rethink water. So today there are new parks designed to act as rivers, carrying that rainwater and the local roof water away rather than letting it go down the drains. Rather than covering the city with concrete, making it more of a flood basin, they're planting new flower beds to make the ground more spongy. They're reimagining how you make something as simple as a car park.
This may look like any other road surface, but just look at what happens when I pour some water on it. You can see rather than pooling or washing away, it sinks down beneath the surface. This, it turns out, is no ordinary asphalt.
And the reason everyone comes here to see what Copenhagen is doing is that, it turns out, nearly every country has these same problems.
We're talking a lot in the UK about problems with our sewage system and about sewage outflows. To what extent is that something that you're seeing across Europe?
It's a widespread problem.
Oh really, it's not just Britain?
No, it's known about for years. It's just that a lot of combined sewer overflows, you don't even know where they are. Across Europe, they've been put in, they're in some total plan somewhere.
Some pipe goes out somewhere.
In a town plan, there's thousands of towns. A lot of the time people don't even know where they are. So the first challenge is to map them.
Is this the most shocking revelation of all? That even the water companies and authorities don't know how much of a sewage problem all of us actually have. Not just in Copenhagen, but everywhere. Now, at this point, it's worth saying water companies also have another job. Alongside taking away our dirty water, they need to deliver us clean water. And quite a lot of it comes from here, Rutland Water in the East Midlands, England's biggest reservoir. The water here supplies nearly 2 million households in the country's driest region. You can hardly imagine a more critical part of our life support system. But there's a problem here too.
For some, it's an indictment of the privatised water system that despite increased incidents of drought and hosepipe bans, it has been more than 3 decades since the last reservoir was completed in this country, and it'll be the best part of another decade until the next one is finally finished.
Now, in fairness, old reservoirs have been extended. Old quarries have been converted to hold water. But as for new reservoirs, well, there are a few in the works, but it's still tricky.
New reservoirs are a huge undertaking. We're talking about people's homes, we're talking about agricultural land, we're talking about billions of pounds worth of investment. And why would we do that? If there's still work to be done on the network that we have, we need to squeeze every bit that we can out of the infrastructure that we've got before we go on to the next step.
There are plans too for a new pipe network throughout the Anglia region, hundreds of miles from north to south, the beginnings maybe of a national grid for water. But the problem is, it's just scratching the surface. According to the National Infrastructure Commission, we may need to spend an extra £40 billion on water supply. That's on top of the £60 billion or so on sewage. So, more than HS2. And even that won't be enough to prevent occasional sewage spills into rivers. Meanwhile, in the absence of those reservoirs, water is being sucked up out of pristine underground aquifers. The ecosystem is being disrupted.
This river here, it's a chalk stream, still classified. There's no chalk water in this river anymore.
Once upon a time, Fergal Sharkey was famous as the lead singer of the Undertones. Today, he's just as, if not better known, as a vocal water campaigner. It all began here, at his fishing club, where the water once ran clear, but is now decidedly murky.
Its source is up the other side of Lytton, at Lee Grave. It doesn't exist anymore because all of the groundwater, that underground reservoir that connected to the original spring, that's been so over-abstracted, that connection was broken decades ago. So there's no chalk water going into it. When this actually starts to look like a river, it's the output of what's called the East Hyde Waste Treatment Plant, or more commonly known as the Lytton Sewage Works.
So this becomes a sewage stream.
We've replaced chalk stream water with treated sewage. Thanks.
Meanwhile, the toll from untreated sewage continues to mount. 1.8 million hours in a single year. What was supposed to happen only in exceptional circumstances, a trickle, looks more like a flood into a water system which is struggling to cope.
We need infrastructure projects right around the country to fix some of these issues.
And so if you're calling for more investment in future, presumably all else equal, that would mean higher bills.
Any increase in bills can only be for new investment, not about things that should have been done in the past.
But the whole point is that nearly all our water problems are all about what wasn't done in the past. Out of sight, out of mind. We spent decades trying not to think about the pipes beneath our feet. Now, they need the biggest revamp in a century, and it won't come cheap.